Welcome to the Diabetes Podcast, where real stories meet real science, helping you take charge, not just take medicine. Today we're joined by Stanley Bronstein, creator of The Way of Excellence and founder of the Million Pound Weight Loss Challenge. Stanley once weighed 367 pounds and now maintains around 145, all without drugs or surgery. In this conversation, he gets real about identity, food as comfort, and the moment he drew the line in the sand at age 50. You'll hear how he stopped middle of the night eating, why abstinence can be easier than moderation, and the simple practices he believes anyone can start, like walking 20 minutes and not eating within 5 hours of sleep. If you've ever felt stuck or all or nothing, this episode will show you what's possible when you aim to just beat yesterday. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Diabetes Podcast. I'm Richie.
And I'm Amber.
And Amber, today we're joined by Stanley Bronstein. He's the creator of The Way of Excellence and the founder of the Million Pound Weight Loss Challenge. Stanley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me here.
Awesome. So, Stanley, for listeners who are meeting you for the first time, can you give us a bit of your story? Like, who are you? How did you get to writing the multiple books that you have? But just quickly introduce yourself, please.
Okay, I'll start with this.
Oh, wow. Wow. So if you're just listening without the visuals, Stanley has a photo. And what I know of Stanley is he went from just brace yourself for this because this is insane. 367 pounds to about 145 pounds without drugs, without surgery. So I guess let's start there, Stanley. Like, what was life like for you at your heaviest?
Oh, it was just so much fun, Amber. Just not just kidding. Well, obesity has always had a place in my life. I'll give you a teeny bit of backstory history and then get you up. My mother died when I was 8. And needless to say, that messed with my head. And I was left alone living with my massively obese father, who had no clue about how to eat a healthy diet. And we both just literally ate ourselves to oblivion, both of us.
Goodness.
And you look at my pictures, I just started getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Over the years, I had times where I'd lose a little bit of weight, but then I'd go back to my old habits, put it right back on, and get even bigger. That's how I got up to a full 367 by the time I was around 28, 29, 30 years old, somewhere around there. I don't have the exact dates.
Good gravy.
Yeah. Yes, lots of good gravy, actually. And lots of donuts and lots of pies and lots of pasta and lots of many other things. So food was my comfort. And my relationship with food was not good. When I was at my full 367, no, I did not feel good. But, it was what I knew. It was my existence. And like so many people, when you're like that, there's a teeny part of you that feels like you can do something about it. And then there's the rest of you that's like, this is who I am. This is what it is. And, oh, I don't want to do this because it's too hard. Or you mean I got to do that? That's too hard. Or I don't want to give this up because that's too hard. And those kind of things.
Well, it's been your coping mechanism for 42 years at that point.
Yeah.
Because 50 was when you were like, enough.
Well, mine kind of went in 2 stages. Because what happened was, I maxed out at 367 actually when I was like around 30 years old. Then I went to Weight Watchers and I actually lost 100 pounds. I got my 100-pound ribbon. And at the time, I thought that was a healthy diet. But as we're going to talk about diet a little bit later in the podcast, what I thought was healthy back then, I would not think is healthy now. My definitions kind of changed and I've learned a lot more since I knew back then. So The weight I lost on Weight Watchers was more by portion control
Okay.
than it was by eating healthy. Um, so those Weight Watchers dinners, the frozen ones, the entrees, with the pretty pictures on the front of the cover that
Yeah.
are loaded that are loaded with sodium and they're totally processed food.
Mhm.
I ate a ton of those. And like I said, I went from 367, I got down to around 265, I think it was, right about there. And that was my last year in law school, actually. So I did that both in conjunction while I was studying. And I got small enough to where I was able to, women started wanting to date me.
Hmm.
And I wound up getting married. And I slowly started putting the weight back on. Got comfortable, and the weight started coming back on. But one thing interesting, I never got back to my full 367. I only got to about 320 at my max. And the reason I didn't go back all the way to the 367 was one change, one permanent change that I made from when I was at my max. When I was at my max, I used to wake up in the middle of the night and
Mm.
eat a full meal. And I don't mean a snack, I meant a full meal.
A lot of
So,
people wake up in the middle of the night and eat. And that's something that I found so interesting as a diabetes educator was the volume of people who had this habit of waking up in the middle of the night eating. So
yeah, it
if you
happens all the time.
if you had to pinpoint what that was about, before you stopped doing that habit, was that stress, comfort? Do you think it was like just swings in your blood sugar or something like that in the middle of the night? Like,
Probably swings in blood sugar and comfort.
hmm,
Just food was my mechanism.
right.
It's who I was.
Mm,
It's what I did.
your identity.
And, but, I knew it was bad and I knew it was not good for me. How about that? That's a better way to put it. I knew it was not good for me and that I should stop doing that. The way I stopped it, I accidentally learned something that I now counsel people on, which is I'd wake up in the middle of the night ready to eat. I'd go to the freezer. I'd pull out one of those frozen dinners. I would look at the picture on the box.
Which is always prettier than the actual
Yeah.
after you cook it.
And the funny thing is I had so many of those I can still taste one right now and I haven't had one in 35 years and I can still taste
Wow.
it in my brain. So I
Yeah.
would look at the picture. I said, I know what that tastes like. I've had a bunch of these. I would imagine that taste in my mouth, imagine I ate it, and then I would say, that was good. And then I'd put the package back in the freezer and I'd go to sleep. So in other words, I
That's incredible.
visualized that I ate the food. And here's when I accidentally learned, and I counsel people on this all the time. You don't have to put food in your mouth to taste it.
Hmm.
Think about that. You don't have to
Mhm.
eat it to taste it.
Mhm.
What I was doing was I was visually
Tasting it.
imagining that I ate it,
Uh-huh.
feeling the sensation in my body without actually putting it into my mouth. And when my wife and I now we go to some event or something, and there's food that I know I shouldn't eat because it's got too much sodium in it or it's processed or something. My wife's skinny, good shape. Although I've been working on her to eat better too, but she'll take the food, she'll let me smell it, and I will smell it, and I can immediately tell you what the ingredients are. I can immediately tell you what it's going to taste like. And I go, okay, and then I don't want it. So I've learned to taste food without putting it in my mouth. And that actually works with other things too. I talked to somebody the other day about smoking cigarettes,
Mhm.
and she said she wanted to quit smoking. And I told her about that. And I said, you don't have to actually light the cigarette in order to taste it, feel it, and imagine you smoked it. She said, that's a good idea. I'm going to have to try that. So think of it as a calorie-free way, a sugar-free way to taste the food. So that one permanent change
Hmm.
resulted in me only maxing out at 320, not 367. So that I say that change was good for a 45, 50 pound
That's a 45, 50 pound change. Yeah.
right there. So
Okay, so can I dive into that a little
yes,
because being trained as a dietitian through my schooling, we learned tons of different techniques to help eat less, to help with portion control. And I have to say that was never one of them, and it I can see how it makes sense to visualize it, and because you do have that sensation. How did you get to that point? Because I imagine it wasn't an overnight thing. Like when did it begin working for you? How often did you have to go sniff it before you didn't open it and put it in the microwave? Or like what was that process for you?
yeah, well, back when I was at my max,
Mm-hmm.
it was every night. And I would even have nightmares. I woke up imagining that I ate something I shouldn't eat. And then I'd wake up in a cold sweat and I'd realize, no, I didn't eat that. And I go, "Oh, okay, good, I'm okay."
Wow.
And I even started wondering in my head with the fact that I imagined that I ate this, convinced my body metabolically to act like it had eaten it.
Hmm.
I had concerns about that, but it didn't turn out to be the case. It turned out that if it didn't go in my mouth, it didn't show up on the scale, it didn't show up in my blood sugar, it didn't show up in anything. So, moral of the story, keep it out of your mouth. So, see, so much of food, at the time, I didn't understand the purpose of food.
That's a great point.
I'll ask you, I'll ask you, Amber, what is the purpose of the food you eat?
I would say to nourish your body. It's the fuel for your all the processes that go on in your body. It's your fuel for metabolism.
Okay, it's
Hmm.
not to make you feel good when you're lonely,
It's not for emotions.
when you're
No.
tired,
Nope. There are better strategies.
when you're at a party.
Mm-mm.
So, but that's not what we're taught.
No, right. It's so common and it starts so early because if you think about if you have children, how often have you rewarded the child, with food? Like if you go clean your room or if you do this, then we can go get an ice cream or then we can have this dessert. If you clean your plate, then we can have this. And it's ingrained at such a young
Only all
age.
the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Only all the
You
time.
talk about people eating in the middle of the night.
Hmm.
I've got one of my nephews. He's 8 or 9,
What a pivotal
and
age.
yeah, and I was hearing stories about how he'd wake up and he's overweight, obese, and stories of getting up in the middle of the night to go eat and things like that. And I tried to talk to him about this, and basically I was told to mind my own business. I mean, first thing he ran to his mother and said, "Uncle Stanley's fat shaming me."
Mm.
So, so there's so much of that out there. There is not only an improper relationship with food, there's denial
Yep.
about where we're at. See, I have a system, I call it not on purpose eating. Nope. N-O-P-E.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Okay. You reach the nope point
Hmm.
when, I actually have a flow chart. I don't have it here in front of me, but it's a flow chart. Am I hungry? Yes. Then proceed to the next step. If the answer is no, stop. Don't even eat.
You mean if the answer is
Um,
nope, stop?
yeah, yeah. If the answer is nope, stop. Um, then I go, is what I'm about to eat healthy? If the answer is yes, proceed. If the answer is nope, stop. Um, Eat a bite of that food. Did I enjoy that? Am I still hungry afterwards? Yes. Proceed to the next step. Nope. Stop. So along the way, see, see, taking pleasure from your food, satisfying your emotions from your food, that is a secondary purpose of the food you eat. There is nothing wrong with enjoying the food you eat.
Hmm.
In fact, I highly recommend it. I just recommend that the food you eat is healthy so that you're fueling your body properly. And then if what you're eating is healthy and you happen to enjoy it as well, wonderful.
Hmm.
Nothing wrong with that. Knock yourself out. So the first thing I learned in my process was not to eat late at night. I figured that out. I would almost say I did this accidentally
Hmm.
through trial and error
Interesting.
because every mistake that you could possibly make about healthy weight loss and healthy eating, I've made it 50, 100 times.
And I think you are not alone in that experience.
No,
Not at
not at
all.
all.
Hmm.
And we're going to talk and we're going to talk about that
Hmm.
too as we get on this for people who want to get started.
Hmm.
So here I am, I'm married. I'm slowly putting weight back on, getting bigger and bigger. Fast forward to my 50th birthday.
Yeah, I want to dive in here for sure.
For 4 months before my 50th birthday, actually.
Hmm.
4 months before my 50th birthday, I'm 320 pounds. Hadn't had a heart attack yet. Hadn't had a stroke
Interesting word.
yet.
Hmm.
Was not on diabetes medication or blood pressure medication yet,
Yet.
but I probably should have been. The only reason I wasn't was I wasn't going to the doctor because, like so many people, I don't want to go to the doctor. I'm avoiding the doctor. I don't like what the doctor's going to tell me.
Hmm.
I asked myself, where am I going to be in 5 years if I keep doing what I'm doing?
What made you ask that question? What
Well,
made you take a long, hard look in the mirror?
a lot of people are turning 50 years old or 60 or 40, milestone ages. You
Yeah.
tend to think about those things, but
Okay.
part of it too was dissatisfaction
Hmm.
with myself. I felt like I was wasting my potential.
Interesting.
You know, I knew that I could be so much more than I was. And for me to do what I'm doing, to be quite frank with you, it was ridiculous. All the emotions were there. There was shame. There was disgust.
That's a
A
big
lot
one.
of, a lot of disgust.
Hmm.
Um, didn't like where I was. And so I said, where am I going to be in 5 years? And care to guess what the answer was?
I know the answer, but I'm gonna have you. I would imagine with a lot of shame, a lot of disgust. You, it's hard to really admit the answer to
The
yourself.
answer was I was going to be dead.
Hmm.
And guess what? I did not want to be dead.
Why? What made you come up with that answer? Like, how did you know that that would be the outcome, or like what had you so convinced?
Because that's how badly I was messing up.
Hmm.
That's how disgusted I was with myself. I relived all of these emotions just 2 days ago.
Hmm.
I took my wife to a new Chinese restaurant in town, and there was a guy behind us in line. He had to be 425 pounds. And I was at the restaurant. I was not ordering any food for myself because I don't eat at a lot of restaurants. We'll talk about that too. But my wife was getting something. She wanted to try it, and I was with her. We were getting it. And I'm watching this guy, and I'm watching his habits, and I'm watching what he's doing. And it literally tore me up on the inside
Yeah.
because I could see how painful it was for him to walk. I could see the restaurant was very busy. He had to stand up for like 20, 30 minutes to make his order, and I could tell it was hard for him to stand up. Um, I saw how when he finally got his food, how he wolfed everything down and what it was. It just, I relived my whole experience just watching him.
Hmm.
And, you know, I used to, when I would see somebody like that, the emotion that popped into my mind was disgust for them. And then at some point, I realized that if I was disgusted with them, that's how I must have felt about myself, because I was the same thing, if not worse. And so now when I see somebody like that, I care. I feel emotions. I wanted to go up to the guy and I wanted to start talking to him.
Hmm.
And I wanted to tell him there's a better way. But it's such a delicate topic. You
Right.
can't do that with someone. That's why I'm on podcasts like this, because we can talk about it.
Yeah. It's a way
But
for someone to maybe be open to hearing instead of, hey, you're in the middle of eating, let me disrupt your meal.
yeah,
And I saw, and maybe you noticed me looking at you and felt some kind of way. Do you
yeah.
think he noticed you watching him from time to time?
No, I don't, because I was very careful
Okay. Why
about
were
it.
you
But
so careful about it?
because it's rude.
Yeah.
It's rude to sit there and stare at somebody all the time.
Hmm. And probably you know what it felt like on his side as
Oh,
well.
absolutely I do.
Yeah.
I got looked at all the time,
Mm.
made fun of all the time, all those things. But moving to where I was when I was going to turn 50, I've got a term that I use for what I was doing. I call it slow aside.
Oh, interesting.
I was slowly eating myself to death. I
Mm.
didn't put a gun to my head. I didn't pull the trigger, but I was killing myself bite by bite, day after day. So, you know, what's the difference? You know, and I didn't like that. And I didn't want that. So I turned to my wife and I said, I'm done. I'm cooked. That's the word I use, cooked. I said, this is wrong. I'm wasting something here. I can be so much better than what I am. And we're going to get into that too as we're talking about this. So I said, I'm done. I'm cooked. I'm going to learn to start eating better right now, not tomorrow, not next week, not next year, right now. And I said start eating better. I didn't say start eating perfectly.
Yeah. That's
I said
huge.
start eating better.
Hmm.
And I said I'm going to start exercising every day, or trying to exercise every day if my body can handle it. And my exercise of choice is going to be walking. I picked walking because you didn't need a lot of special equipment. You could do it almost anywhere, anytime. And I figured it would beat my body up less
Yeah.
than most other forms of
Yeah.
exercise.
It sounds
So
like you recognized that you were doing something that very next day or that day. Like you were doing something
I did it.
immediately.
I did it that day.
Yeah. And that was a low barrier to entry, which is huge when it comes to making change.
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you
Yeah.
some of the things. I'll tell you some of the things I did. Um, I decided I'm going to quit drinking alcohol
Mm-hmm.
because I won't say I was an alcoholic, but I was drinking scotch pretty much every day. I was
A
definitely
numbing
drinking.
agent.
I was definitely drinking too much, and it was not serving me. I was serving it.
Mm.
So what did I do? You talk about symbolism here. I took my bottle of scotch, opened up the top, went to the toilet, poured it down the toilet, hit flush. Haven't had a drink since. That cutoff point, that symbolism again,
Hmm.
that empowering symbolism.
Yep.
I sat there, I was drinking 2-liter bottles of Diet Pepsi caffeine free. And surely you think in your mind, because it's diet and it's caffeine free, it's got to be healthy, right?
No, I don't
No,
think that, but a lot
no,
of people do.
I know it's not,
Hmm.
but that's not what the marketing companies tell us. Here's this great, wonderful product. That's what people think. So I threw that down the toilet, flush, done, gone. There were foods in my house. I got rid of them right away. and I started eating better right now. And to show you again how raw the experience was, I told my wife, I'm going to make some changes because I have to make these changes or I'm going to be dead. You might like them, you might not like them. You might agree with them, you might not agree with them. And to be quite frank with you, I don't care. If you don't like it, there's the door. You can walk out right now.
Okay,
I'm going on.
let's stop there half a second because this is your wife and
Yeah,
you drew such a strong line in the sand about your need for support, about what you were doing moving forward. What gave you the bravery to say that? Because a lot of people listening would be like, I couldn't say that to my spouse. I couldn't, that's my
it's
spouse.
called,
They can't leave.
I call it a moment of healthy selfishness.
Hmm.
I put myself first. And what I told her was, I said, I'm going on a journey and I am inviting you to come along with me. And I hope you do. But if you don't, that's okay. And I'm going to give a spoiler alert here. That's been 17. It's been, yesterday was my 17th rebirthday. So it's been a full 17 years since that we're still married. So, so there's your spoiler alert.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how strongly I felt about this. And that's how strongly you need to feel about it. I'm not saying you need to be rude to your spouse. I'm not saying you need to be mean to your spouse, but I'm saying you need to feel that strongly about yourself. See, part of the problem is a lot of people in situations like me, we're givers. We're
Yeah.
taking care
Ooh,
of others. We're helping each
this is a
other.
big one.
We're giving them to this. We're giving them to that. Well, at
Mm-hmm.
some point, you need to take care of yourself because you're so good at giving that you're neglecting yourself and it's eating you up.
Yeah,
Mm.
who cares for the caregiver? Right.
Yeah, it's so you have to be selfish in a healthy manner,
Yeah.
which is what I call that. I took care of myself. So, like I said, I gave up alcohol, gave up sodas, and I gave up red meat, beef and pork. And I'm not sure why I chose to do that, but I felt like in the long term, those were part of my problem. They were not good for me. And to show you how interesting it was that I did that, my father was a butcher,
Hmm.
Hmm.
and we grew up in a house of unlimited free meat, and yet I chose to give up beef and pork.
That is huge because we've even talked to a friend of ours that struggles and his wife is a butcher and that is his biggest hurdle to overcome. So that's very interesting.
Okay, let's talk about another topic.
Yeah,
We're just jumping around real quick.
that's fine.
Just because somebody puts something in front of you doesn't mean you have to eat it. I had when I was part of my journey, there was a time for a couple of months where my wife's mother moved in with us because she was moving back to Arizona and she hadn't found a house yet. So she moved in with us for a couple of months until she found her own place.
That's very challenging, as
Yes,
anyone could
and
imagine.
well, no, no, she was fine, but she wanted us to be happy. She wanted me to be happy. So she bought all these things, gourmet bread, gourmet this, gourmet
Hmm.
that, and she
Yeah.
brought it into the house.
Hmm.
And within a week, I figured out that just because she brought it into the house doesn't mean I need to eat it.
Yeah.
Because, I had to say
Hmm.
no.
Hmm.
Um, so the point is that when I was getting ready to turn 50, I started, okay, that was not the first time in my life where I told myself the truth. That was not the first time in my life where I questioned what I was doing. It was not the first time in my life where I said I needed to do something. But it was the first time in my life where I permanently acted on what I was telling myself.
Okay, you've got to try to dive into what would the distinction was. Like, why did this time matter, because this is the crux of it all, right? Like people are always saying, I know what I'm doing. I know that I'm killing myself little by little. Like people have a lot of awareness typically about the bad behaviors, but they don't
Okay.
change. Like there, that's a huge, like that feeling of doing something different feels so insurmountable. Like they just don't know where to
It
begin.
was it was it was many things.
Yeah.
One is, like I said, disgust. It was a feeling of finality, a feeling that, okay, I've played around long enough. I've already lived my life of excess.
Hmm.
I can't keep doing that because it's catching up to me. It's rapidly catching up to me, and it's going to be done. So, as I tell people, when I started making these changes, they go, I couldn't do what you do. How can you go to a party and not drink alcohol? How can you, what do you mean you're never going to have alcohol again the rest of your life? I go, first of all, I go, I've already had my lifetime share of alcohol
Hmm.
and yours and probably 20 others. I've already had my lifetime share of Diet Pepsi caffeine free and yours and probably 20 other people's. I've already had my lifetime share of beef
Red meat. Yeah.
and pork and yours
Mm.
and probably 20 others. I don't need it anymore.
I
It's
don't
time
need
for
it
me to
anymore.
start experiencing something different.
Hmm.
You know, it's it's that feeling enough is enough. You know, I reached the point where enough was enough. So I got started, and there was not a perfect thing. There were good days, there were bad days, there were ups and downs, but I did not stop.
Mm-hmm.
I kept going.
Mm-hmm. I think can we just
Yeah.
park here for a half a second, because I think this piece, if you're listening, this is the piece to grab onto, because so often it's all or nothing. It's perfection or nothing. And what you said is so crucial. Yes, the goal is not perfection. It is to be your best self, to wake up every day and choose the life that you want. It's that identity shift, you know.
Okay. I want to share
Yeah.
something with you. I want to share
Yeah.
something with you. Anybody listening, you are not perfect. You are a
Amen.
human being.
Hmm.
You are going to make mistakes, and there are going to be some big doozies. You're going to make some mistakes. There are no perfect human beings, and I can promise you, you're not going to be the first.
That's right.
I like to say I'm as close to perfect as you can get, and I'm not perfect either. Haha, that's a joke.
I
But
got it.
but you're not going to be perfect.
No.
You're gonna mess up. You have one simple goal: beat yesterday. That is your goal. You want to be better today than you were yesterday, better tomorrow than you were today. But I'm going to share something funny with you about beat yesterday. Sometimes staying even or not sliding back into the hole that you crawled out of is beating yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
You had a bad day, you failed. What have you done in the past? Well, I screwed up, I failed, I'm going to go comfort myself, I'm going to go eat this crap.
Right.
Or I failed miserably. I ate the stuff I shouldn't eat. But instead of crawling back down in the hole I came from, going back down the hole I
Mm-hmm.
came from, I'm going to do better tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go right back to these new habits I've started for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to learn from that mistake I made, and I'm going to do better the next time. Okay?
Yep.
That came out of a failure.
Mm-hmm.
But was that beating yesterday? I think it was
Hmm.
because in the past, you wouldn't have done that.
Hmm. And I want to say that a lot of the emotions that you have, I use this analogy a lot, the tire tread. You've been in the tire tread emotions of disgust, of shame and beating yourself down. And I think when people have a day that wasn't on track, those tire track emotions, the ones that they've lived day in and day out for decades, can easily creep back in. And that's
Yeah.
what I believe causes people to backtrack and
Well,
slide
okay,
down.
they can creep back in, but what are you going to do about it when they creep back in?
You're going to tell them, shut up. I
Are
love
you
it.
gonna, are you gonna feel the emotions, or are you gonna say, "There I go again"? Do better this time. You know?
I think you're right. It's about not allowing that shame spiral to come in.
Yeah. But look, life beats us up enough as it is.
Yes.
Don't help it out.
Right.
You don't need to beat yourself up to you screwed up.
Hmm.
Don't blame. Okay. My mother died and I went on a life of obesity. Is it my mother's fault that she died when I was 8 years old and she was 48?
No.
Is it my father's fault that he didn't know better and he didn't know how to eat properly?
No.
So I ate crappy food for all those years?
No.
Okay. Is it my fault? Am I to blame for what I did?
No.
Okay. Based upon the emotions that caused me to get there.
Hmm.
Blame is the problem.
Right.
Blame is a nasty word. I'm going to tell you something here. Blame is irrelevant.
That's amen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Blame serves
No
no
one.
useful purpose.
Hmm.
All that matters is identifying what the problem is and what are you going to do to fix it. It's all that matters.
Absolutely.
I got to tell you something right now. I don't care which side of the politics you're on. I wish someone would tell that to the politicians in Washington.
I'm
Blame,
glad you said it because I had it on deck right here,
yeah,
man. It's
yeah.
just like blame isn't helping. It's not. Yeah.
Blame is irrelevant. We got a problem. What are you going to do to fix it? That's it.
Exactly. Yep.
All that matters. So, see, I'm all about cutting through the BS. That's what I'm all
Especially,
about.
and that's especially important when it comes to your own self. Where are you lying to yourself? What story are you telling yourself about something? And is that story even true? I think that's crucial to stop yourself in the tracks of. So, with that, I
Well,
want to come back to something because when you gave up alcohol, gave up red meat, different things, I want to come to something that people say to me often, which is, "Oh, I could never give up blah blah blah." Like how do you respond to that without shaming them?
okay. I tell them what I learned out of my experience. And let me give you the full breadth of my experience. Okay.
Hmm.
My experience was I went from 367 to around 145, as you can see in this picture, unless you're listening, on Spotify or something.
Hmm.
There's a picture up here. I went from a person who at the time could only walk 2 or 3 blocks
Mm.
to a person who walks a half marathon or more every day. Yesterday was my 17th birthday. I walked in a marathon.
Wow, congrats.
And that was the 107th time I've done that
Oh
since
my
that day I
goodness.
started. Okay.
Hmm.
This is how much walking I did last year.
And so you
5,166 miles. Okay.
have a
Imagine
picture
I,
of you walking across the United States and beyond.
yes, well, imagine I started in Los Angeles. I came up 300 miles short of London.
Wow.
I ended up in the middle of the Atlantic, but I knew how to swim, so we're okay. But now,
And you
si-
started that walking just one block.
yeah,
That's
and
incredible.
then huffing and puffing while I was doing it. Now,
Wow.
since that day, I have walked over 72,000 miles.
Mm.
That is 30% of the way to the moon. If you take the Earth at the equator, I've gone around the Earth at the equator 2.91 times. come June or July, I'm going to
Make
do
it 3.
my third time.
That's
Now,
awesome.
I'm going to tell you why I'm telling you that story. First of all, why do I do that? One,
Mhm.
I'm a little nuts. Two, uh,
Let to
two,
thine own self be true.
two, I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Three, I haven't found my limit yet.
Wow.
Ooh.
I want to see what I can do. And now, so I learned two things out of this experience.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is I am more powerful than I ever imagined.
Say it again.
I am more powerful than I ever imagined.
Yes.
Now, let's apply that to your listeners.
Mm-hmm.
Not only did I learn I am more powerful than I ever imagined, I learned that so is everybody else.
Yeah.
I am no more special than you.
Mm-hmm.
You are no more special than me. We are all special, each and every one of us.
Yes.
You are more powerful than you ever imagined. You are more powerful than you ever imagined. You are more powerful than you ever imagined. So we see part of it is we're sold this bill of goods.
Yeah.
What I've done, the changes I make, some people would say they're hard. Well, walking around at 367 pounds was hard.
Mm-hmm.
What I do today is easy compared to that. I do these things because I want to live a very long, very healthy life.
Yeah. And I think also every day that you woke up and chose yourself, every day that you woke up and said, I'm going to go around the block and I'm going to do your banking wins, as I call it. Like
Yes,
you are proving to yourself that you are powerful. You're
yes,
proving to
and
yourself that you can do this.
yes, and I want to teach you something else. Everybody says, okay, January 1st, last month, I'm going to join the gym. I'm going to get in shape this year. I'm motivated. Well, now it's February 2nd. How many people you think have stopped going to the gym?
In 27-degree weather, how many
Yeah, well,
people went out and
that's
ran or
I've
walked
worked in a
today?
gym. I can tell you it drops off to about, 80%.
if yeah, if not more. So the point is, motivation wears off.
Hmm.
It is impossible to stay motivated all the time. Just is.
That's so key.
You are gonna have days where you don't want to get up and walk.
Hmm.
You're gonna have days when you don't feel like it. Well, I had an interesting role model, an accidental role model. Again, life gave me a gift that I wasn't looking for. 2 years before I got started, I met a woman named Peggy Chun. She was an artist who lived in Honolulu. She had Lou Gehrig's disease. She was bedridden on a ventilator, could not move, could
Goodness.
not speak. And the only way she could communicate, people would hold up an eye chart. They were trained, and they could read her eye movements, and she could spell out words. So that was how she communicated. When I saw her, I said to myself, please put a pillow over my head and take me out if I ever get like that.
Mm.
That's what went through my mind. Well, that's not what was going through her mind. Her mind was, oh, it's a beautiful day today. My grandkids are coming over later. They're gonna take me to the park. We're gonna sit outside and we're gonna paint. And we're gonna do all this, we're gonna do all that. I was getting ready. I was at the very beginning of driving around the whole United States to interview 50 people for a book I was writing. And she said, tell me about the people. I wished I could go with you. It sounds like so much fun.
Mm.
And she had this incredible joy for life, all while she was bedridden and couldn't move.
Wow.
So, you know the saying, what would Jesus do?
Hmm.
Every time I had a morning where I didn't want to get up and walk, I didn't say, what would Jesus do? I said, what would Peggy Chun do?
Yeah,
Mm.
Peggy would have walked.
Yeah, the answer is Peggy would have gotten her lazy butt out of bed and she'd have gone walking and she might not ever come back once she went out that door because she was having so much fun. So that was me. So
Mm.
I essentially started walking for Peggy Chun without even realizing that's what I was doing. But and I have a saying, you have a day, first of all, I told you how much I walk. I walk a half marathon every day. When you want to know something, you know how much walking I tell you should do every day? 20 minutes.
Mhm.
I have a book on this. It's called Walk 20. It's on my website. You can download it digitally for free. You can read it on the website for free. Walk 20. You don't have to do what I do. I'm going to give you a simple goal. Let me ask you this, Amber. Everybody listening, if everybody in the United States, if everybody in the world who was able-bodied would eat a little bit less processed food. Look, I'm not saying totally give it up, just a little bit less processed junk food. If they would quit eating 5 hours before they go to sleep, so in other words, no snacks, don't take any food to bed with you, quit eating 5 hours before you go to sleep, and walk 20 minutes a day. You think this country would be healthier?
There's no way it couldn't be. There's
Yeah.
absolutely no way that it couldn't be.
And that's
Because
all I'm saying.
Mhm.
That you don't have to do what I do. I do it because I can and because I want to.
Mhm.
And if you want to, wonderful. Nothing wrong with that. But I didn't start out that way. I say, see, I have what you call an addictive personality, in case you haven't figured that out.
So use it to your benefit. It sounds
Yes,
like what you're
I am
saying. Yeah.
addicted to positive, healthy things as
Mm.
opposed to negative, unhealthy things. You
Mhm.
know, that's part of this whole process. So as I went on and I started losing the weight, about 5 years into it, I kind of stalled and
Mhm.
I said, I want to up my game. So I gave up chicken and turkey, still was eating eggs and butter and cheese, but essentially I went vegetarian. And again, I kept up with the walking. Again, I'm losing more weight, feeling better, better and better, stronger and stronger and stronger. Then about 5 years into that, I got down to 180 pounds. And my weight was not stable. It would go 180, 190, 200, 190, 100. It would go back and
Mhm.
forth. It wasn't stable. And I could not get below 180, all while I was walking 10 to 15 miles every day. So I said, I'm walking this much and I can't lose the weight. Can't get below 180. I'm doing something wrong here.
Hmm.
So I figured something else out. You can't exercise your way out of a poor diet.
Oh boy.
Exer- Exercise is important, but nutrition is even more important.
I think Amber says you can't outrun your plate. I think
Yeah,
that's
you
the
can't.
Or
So,
you can out eat any medicine or you can out eat anything. Yeah.
yeah.
It doesn't mean that
So,
walking isn't healthy. It's just as
yeah.
you are talking about your experience, you kind of plateau. Yeah.
I saw an article the other day. It said, how much walking do I need to do to lose 20 pounds? The answer
A
is
lot.
if you keep eating crap, you can walk as much as you want. You're not going to lose that 20 pounds.
Mhm.
You know, you keep eating fast food. I heard something the other day. You know what happens when you take the S out of fast food?
yeah.
You get fat food.
Mhm.
And or to put it the other way, whoever put the S in fat food was a marketing genius
Mm.
when they came up with fast food.
That's
So
interesting.
you,
Yeah. Yeah.
but when I gave up, so I said I'm going to give up bread, butter, cheese, and ice cream. You know what
Ooh.
happened when I gave up
I
bread,
can hear
butter?
people listening. I can hear their thoughts being like, now you done gone too far.
No,
Let's
no.
talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I learned. Okay, you want ice cream? Take yourself some bananas, ripe bananas, throw them in the blender and blend them up. You have nice cream. Then throw it in the freezer afterwards. Tastes just like ice cream. It's banana flavored. It's delicious and it's healthy.
There are
Um,
strategies. Yeah.
we're going to talk about, diabetics. Well, my doctor says I shouldn't be eating fruit.
Yes, that's a big thing for people with diabetes
Yeah.
that they're
So
often told that, unfortunately. Yeah.
yes, unfortunately, and we're going to go into
Mm.
why that's
Go ahead, go
not
there.
necessarily good advice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because your A1C is 5.1 and you eat a
Yeah.
lot of fruit.
Actually, I just had my blood work done 3 weeks ago. I had my physical. It was 5.2. So
Okay.
it goes
I
between
either way.
it
Don't
goes
don't
between
be don't be
Really
5.1.
slipping,
good.
Stanley.
Yeah, it goes between 5.1 and 5.2. It's like every other time it's 5.1, then it's 5.2.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good.
It is good. Very
And
good.
I eat a ton of fruit
Mm-hmm.
every day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, because if your sugar comes in the form unrefined, natural,
Yeah.
like such as in fruit, it is loaded with fiber. You're getting fiber along with the sugar. And when you're doing that, your metabolism processes that sugar much more slowly, and it does not cause your blood sugar to spike. You know,
Now, what about for people who that does cause their blood sugar to spike? What would you say?
okay, first of all,
I set you up there. I'm sorry.
I'm assuming that's okay. No, I'm assuming those people must have a constant blood glucose monitor on or something
Hmm.
to monitor what they're doing so they would know what they're doing. I
Right.
mean, obviously, if it's causing your blood sugar to spike, you want to talk to your doctor about it,
Yeah.
and you may not want to eat that.
And
But
I think the real answer behind that, sorry to set you up, is that it's normal for blood sugar to spike after eating carbohydrate
but
rich food.
how
Yeah.
long does it last? Like
Exactly. How long
yes,
does that spike last? If it comes back down to normal within 2 hours, not really a big deal. Yeah.
I had a
Hmm.
woman I was working with um, in New Zealand. She um, diabetic. Her doctor told her to go on the keto diet,
Mm.
and I was like, "What?" Her doctor didn't know any better. We started talking, and I had her try, and she had a glucose monitor, so she could monitor what she was doing.
Hmm.
I had her start eating oatmeal for breakfast with chia seeds, hemp seeds, flax seeds in there.
So you're
And this was,
upping the fiber
yes,
content
yes,
of the oatmeal
yes.
and putting a little bit of healthy
And
fat
putting
in
in
there.
iron and
Hmm.
more iron and more protein
Hmm.
and and then topping it with fruit. And she says, I haven't had fruit in a year. I miss it so much. I said, Are
Mm.
you constipated? She said, Yeah, I can't go to the
Heck
bathroom.
yeah. Right.
Yeah, everything else. So she started eating that. Constipation immediately went away. Her blood sugar started going down. She went to her doctor, and her doctor said, What are you doing? Keep doing it.
Hmm.
So there's so much false information out there, so much bad information out there. Now, I am not your doctor. Amber is not your doctor. But I know from experience a lot of these things, the points I'm raising, discuss them with your doctor or discuss them with your nutritionist, your dietitian, whatever. Discuss them, learn, but be armed with the knowledge. And so when I gave up those things, I lost 50 pounds in like 5 minutes.
Hmm.
I actually got smaller than I am today. And I got to where I was gaunt, but I needed to do that to get the fat off my body.
Hmm.
And then I subsequently put on about 15 pounds back on, but it was muscle this time, not fat. And and that's where I've stabilized, around 145, give or take. And several points here. There is hope. You are not trapped. I hope I'm a role model for you, but you don't have to be me. The world already has one Stanley. It doesn't have to have another one.
I love this.
What it
It's about
needs
being
is
the best
what it
version of
needs is the
you.
best
Hmm.
you that you can be.
Yeah.
And I look at it real simply. And I have a book on the subject, which is again on the website. It's real simple. I call it the case for eating healthy 100% of the time. See, I counsel people who want to lose weight. I tell them you don't have to do what I do. You don't have to be perfect. You don't even have to count calories. But if you will follow two simple rules, you're only going to put healthy food in your mouth and you're going to quit eating when you're full. You can eat whatever you want. If you only eat when you're hungry and what you put in your mouth is only healthy, you pretty much, I mean, I have not counted calories in years.
And I think the only hitch in the giddy up with that is many people don't understand
What is
exactly
healthy?
what is
What
healthy.
healthy is.
Exactly.
Yes.
So how did you get there, Stanley?
Trial and error. As I said, I made every mistake in the book 50
Hmm.
times.
How do people get there without trial and error, because trial and
They
error,
listen to
yeah.
people. They listen to people like you and me
Hmm.
who have been, look,
Right.
Amber knows what she's talking about. I've been in the trenches. I'm going to share a story with you. I first heard this on West Wing, and I'm going to give you an abbreviated version of this. Okay.
Okay.
Man falls into a hole. He's trapped. A pastor goes walking by. He says, Father, I'm trapped in this hole. Can you help me get out? Father says, I'll say a prayer for you, my son. And then he keeps walking. He sees a doctor. And he says, Doctor, I'm trapped down here. Can you help me get out? He says, here's a prescription. Throws it down in the hole and keeps on walking. Then he sees his friend Joe go walking by. And he says, Joe, I'm trapped down here in the hole. Can you help me get out? Joe jumps down in the hole with him. And,
Poor
and the
Joe.
guy says, Joe, are you nuts? Now we're both trapped down here. And Joe says, yes, but I've been down here before and I know the way out. Follow me. I've been down that hole. Follow me. Follow Amber. Amber has not personally been down in that hole, but she's worked with many people who have been down in that hole. She understands that hole.
Hmm.
You know, I've been down there. I get it. And I made mistakes along the way, but I did not stop. Every time I fell down, I got back up. Fall down 7 times, get up 8.
Yep.
Keep going. Look, mistakes are proof that you are trying.
Hmm.
You know, you're gonna mess up.
Right.
I learned what I learned because I figured it out. And as more and more time went on, I started feeling so much better every time I ate healthy. And I said, I don't want to do anything but eat healthy.
Hmm.
You know, I have since made a commitment that no unhealthy food is going to enter my mouth. Period. End of story. But let's go backwards. Could I drink a shot of scotch right now? Yes. Would it kill me if I drank a shot of scotch right now? No. As far along in the game as I am, can I drink that shot of scotch and not relapse and to start drinking scotch every day again? Yeah, I'm confident I could,
Hmm.
but I don't want to, and
Hmm.
I shouldn't. Same thing with the soda pop. Could I drink a Diet Pepsi caffeine free right now? I can taste it just saying it. Could I drink one? Yes, I could. Would it kill me to drink that? Nope, it would not. But I don't want to. I don't need to. I feel so much better without it. Plus, I'm going to share a little secret with you, and this is especially true if you're like me, where you have an addictive personality. Sometimes abstinence is easier than moderation.
Wow.
You
Yep.
know, sometimes just not having one scotch is easier than drinking one scotch a day.
Hmm. Why is that true? Because you have said before, being 100% all in becomes easier than being
Exactly.
wishy-washy.
Because when you are 100% all in, there are no decisions to be made.
Mm. Keeps it
You know,
easy. Hmm.
okay,
You don't get decision
okay.
fatigue.
Right before Christmas, somebody gave me some gourmet cupcakes and cookies. I did not ask myself, could I eat this? I didn't say, oh, I can have one cupcake or one cookie. I just said, I don't want this. I do not eat this kind of food. That is not who I am. My identity
Mm.
has changed. The
Mm.
person I am today is not the same person I used to be. And that is empowering and
It
it's
is.
easy. You know,
This
you
is why
say,
identity is so important and we talk about it so much.
and on my website, there's a whole webinar where we talk about that creating a new identity for yourself and stepping into that new identity. Like I told you before, you can rewrite your story.
Mm.
Your story is just that, a story.
Yes.
You can rewrite it at any time you choose. If you are still breathing, it is not too late.
Right. because you are the author of
Yes.
your own story. And if you believe that you're not, that's a belief to challenge, because if you're
Yeah.
not authoring your story, who the heck is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is never too late to change until you're dead. When you're dead, it's too late to change.
Mm. Okay. So when someone has tried everything, going back to the being in the hole, and they're in this state of feeling hopeless, how do they begin to change their identity? How do you tell them, like, if they're so stuck in these limiting beliefs and those tire tracks?
Just start.
Hmm.
Start anyway.
What
And
about
know that you're,
5 minutes a day walking
yes,
instead of 20?
yes. Start anyway and know that you're going to screw up.
Hmm.
So be prepared ahead of time. You're going to screw up.
Yes.
So just when you screw up, go, okay, let's do better tomorrow.
Your failure contingency plan.
Learn from it. Know you're going to screw up. See, I have two websites for people, and it's actually easier if they just go to the first one. The way of
Thewayofexcellence.com.
excellence.com.
Yeah. And we'll have
That
those linked in the show notes as well.
that's where
Yeah.
most of my notes are. My books. I have tons of videos on this whole thing explaining it. There's 8 of my books are on there that you can download digitally for free. Now, at the bottom of that page, there's a thing that says, if you want to know more about weight loss, click here. That takes you to my other website,
Mm-hmm.
which is millionpoundweightlosschallenge.com. It takes you there. And that's where I have tons of information on healthy eating, what it is, what it is not. That's
Got it.
what's all so important.
Okay. Love it. So, we love to end with practical tips people can take away. So they can go to that website, but what are 3 things someone can do this week that would move them forward towards permanent change? You said just
Okay.
do it. So what are the 3
You are
things to
more
just
powerful
do?
than you ever imagined. Learn that. That's a new belief. Tell yourself that. You're more powerful than you ever imagined. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Your goal is to beat yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Be better today than you were yesterday, but your goal is not perfection. Your goal is excellence. Perfect, you're never going to get perfect. You're not going to be there, but you can always get better.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the rest of your life to do these things. I didn't get to where I just finished 17 years of beating yesterday. Where I am today, it's not fair for you to compare yourself where you're at today with where I am after 17 years of doing this.
Mm-hmm.
What I am is your role model. I am there to show you what is possible,
Yeah.
what you can do. But don't say, "Oh, I'm not walking." Stanley walked a marathon yesterday, and I can't walk 2 blocks.
Right.
Well, good. Go walk the 2 blocks
Yep.
or 1 block or whatever. Do what you can.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
that's
think
what I do.
Yeah, I think that's so crucial because people can see you eating this whole food, plant-based diet and walking 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way to the moon. And they're like, I can't look where he is. I can't.
It's only
That's not
30%.
me.
It's only 30%.
30%. Sorry. Sorry.
Only
And
30%.
but that's not the point. The point is to be motivated to start because you started somewhere and you did it at 50. It wasn't like you did that at 20. You started kind of later in the game. I wouldn't say later in life, maybe halfway through life, because you
Well, the
also
funny
have a
thing is,
goal of longevity.
okay, I'm younger now than I was then, but
Interesting.
I'm
That's
66 years
yeah,
old, but yet
yeah,
I'm in better shape than I was when I was 35. So,
absolutely.
so am I 35 or am I 66?
I love
I don't
that
know.
question.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Am I at midlife or not? I don't like that term midlife.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't like it at all. I think it's a horrible term because I think we're telling our brains that, hey, it's downhill from here, buddy.
And to add on to that, I've worked in the hospital setting, and I can tell you, I've seen 40-year-olds that looked and behaved as if they were 85-year-olds, and I've
Yeah.
seen 90-year-olds who looked and behaved as if they were in their 40s. And it's all about how you take care of yourself, what story you're choosing to tell yourself, and where
Well,
your goals are.
I'll tell you how I had it put to me. I had a doctor many years ago who told me, your health is 10% genetics. It's 10% the cards you were dealt. It's 10% the stuff that happens to you. I mean, I can eat as healthy as I want, exercise as much as I want. If I get hit by a bus when I'm crossing the street, that's going to impact you. So it's 10% your genetics, 10% what happens to you, and the remaining 80% is what you do to yourself. Focus on what you can control. That's part of my whole system. What can you control? And this is what the system looks like. When you go to the website, you're going to see the way of excellence. It's a whole nice color-coded chart that lays the whole thing out. It's all about, I have, based upon my experiences, my whole business career, I'm an attorney and a CPA. I have been paid to take complicated things and make them simple. What I did was I took the experience I went through and I turned it into a system, a human operating system on how to operate your life. Think of it, it's Windows 11, it's Mac OS, it's Android for a human being. It's your operating system, what to do to maximize your potential. And it works. I've used it with many people. I've had many people use it. It works. And it simplifies this. And it all starts with telling yourself the truth.
Absolutely.
But then taking action on it. Tony Robbins always says, never make a decision without taking action on that decision.
Absolutely.
I think he says, never leave the scene of a decision without taking action.
Yeah.
He says something like that. I agree with him. And that was the one thing different that I did that time. I made a decision and I acted on it permanently. I wasn't perfect. Some areas I was perfect. Once I threw that last scotch down the toilet, I didn't have any more. I didn't relapse. When I threw that soda pop down the toilet, I didn't relapse. When I quit eating the meat, I didn't relapse on that. But I had other days where I ate too much. I ate garbage. I ate a lot of, processed food. You can get, Impossible Burgers. Those are vegan. No meat in there. I happen to think they're very unhealthy in my opinion because they're loaded with sodium and processed chemicals and all kinds of other junk. But they're marketed to us as healthy or a healthy alternative. You want to eat whole plant foods as much as you can. That's what you want.
And I want to say a lot of the behaviors that you're talking about, these are not, yes, they are hard-earned behaviors that you've learned through experience, but also they're very science-backed. They're the Mediterranean diet, a whole food plant-based diet. There's solid nutrition research behind those. The same thing with exercise and movement and walking, solid research behind all of these things. And walking is a great way to move without, it's a low barrier to entry and a low risk of injury, all those things are massively important. So go ahead.
This whole journey.
Yeah.
Everything you're going through, the battle is 90% between your ears.
Amen.
It is. It's in your head.
And it's why I love what you said about 10% genetics and 80% you're choosing, because it's easy to scapegoat, well, it's just genetics. And so because you're giving your power away when you do that.
The science shows that many genetic conditions that you're predisposed to can be shut off and reversed with a whole food plant-based diet.
Yeah, it's also the environment can turn
the
switch
because you're not feeding it. You're not feeding, one thing interesting about a whole food plant-based diet, it has been shown that it literally starves cancers in your body. It starves them because it's not feeding them, lots of other things. So is that anything else you want before we wrap up?
No, I think that is beautiful, Stanley. I really appreciate you coming here and sharing your lived experience and the identity piece to it and just making a decision and doing something about it. Those are crucial takeaways. And they're so much more powerful than they look on paper, like so powerful. So thank you
Get
so
started.
much.
Get started. Do not stop.
Absolutely.
Who my role model is? Did I show you this before? This is my role model,
A
the
little
snail.
snail. I
It
love it.
They're steady, diligent, persistent. They get where they're going no matter how long it takes. Get started. Don't stop.
And as I know from having a fish tank as a kid with a snail in it, they multiply. So when you start those good behaviors, they can build upon themselves and multiply.
Yes, they absolutely do.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
so much
much,
for your time,
Stanley.
Stanley. Thank you for coming on the Diabetes Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We at the Diabetes Podcast would like to say thank you to Stanley Bronstein. Proof that small, consistent actions compound. 3 takeaways to put into practice this week are: beat yesterday, progress over perfection, create guardrails, stop eating 5 hours before bed and choose whole, minimally processed foods, and move daily. Start with 20 minutes of walking. Make it effortless to begin. You can explore Stanley's free resources, books, and the Way of Excellence at thewayofexcellence.com and learn more about the Million Pound Weight Loss Challenge at millionpoundweightlosschallenge.com. We'll link everything in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take the time to give it a like and leave a review. This really helps to promote and sustain this free podcast and get the word out to the millions of people worldwide that are struggling with type 2 and prediabetes, letting them know that remission is possible if you take action today. And if you have additional questions or need additional support, you can reach out to us at support@empowereddiabetes.com. Until next time, take courage. You can do this, and we can help.